Hi guys. Okay, sadly I got cut off like my last 20 seconds. So I was talking about why this commercial, Scholes' account of why this commercial chooses, why the writers of this commercial chose to make it about specifically about this young black umpire, and it's this idea that we can what that signifies in the context of this narrative is that he's had more to overcome than if he were you know this than if he were some white guy, right? That he's had to overcome racism. The commercial is reminding us of that, and then that in turn makes us feel really good when he makes it, having proven his talent, right? Suggesting that America is this place where talented people can rise to the top. So I'm going to stop with this next paragraph, where things really come to a head for Scholes. He says, "It's very hard to resist the pleasure of this text, and we cannot accept the pleasure without, for the bewildering minute at least, also accepting the ideology that is so richly and closely entangled with the story that we construct from the video text. To accept the pleasure of this text is to believe that America works, and this is a comforting belief, itself a pleasure of an even higher order, for as long as we can maintain it. Does the text also sell Budweiser? This is something only market research, if you can believe it, can tell. But it surely sells the American way first, and then seeks to sell its brand of beer by establishing a metonymic connection between the product and the nation, a national beer for a national pastime." So you can probably tell from that parenthetical, right, that when Scholes says that only market research can tell if the commercial actually sells Budweiser, that he doesn't think that that's actually very important. That maybe this commercial sold beer, maybe it didn't. He doesn't care. That's not its most important role in Scholes' mind. And I know that that's a weird, counterintuitive thing to accept, and certainly not what the executives at Budweiser meant. But that's exactly what Scholes is arguing. The important thing about this commercial is how it makes us feel good about our beliefs and about America, right? That for Robert Scholes is the important thing about commercials, right? It's the kind of cultural reinforcement that they perform. That's what's important. He could care less whether commercials actually sell the thing they're purportedly attempting to sell, right? So that's the important thing. And if the commercial actually does sell beer, Scholes says, it's because they've done such a good job at cultural reinforcement, right? That they reinforce to us how great America is, right? Make us feel really good about that, and then just kind of create a link between that and the beer. And that's how the selling would operate if Scholes cared at all about selling things. He clearly did not work in a business college. Okay, so that is the Scholes essay in a nutshell. Um, uh, these are the key concepts. So, cultural reinforcement, the idea that commercials work by making us feel good about what we believe in. That's the absolute most important idea that comes out of this essay, right? And then so executives or companies then link their product to those values or beliefs, and that's how commercials work in Scholes' mind. So that's the essay, right? And you have it. It's short. You're going to have to work with it quite a bit, but it's short, and you'll be able to you'll get a hang of it after we start working with it more. So what I want to talk about next is quoting, summarizing, and paraphrasing. All the things you can do to a source. So quoting, I'm sure you all know this already, but just to make sure, because there's always someone who doesn't, quoting is where you use the direct, exact language of a source, and quotes always need to be set off in quotation marks. Summary is an overview of the main idea of a source, so it's sort of a zoomed out view of a source, whereas paraphrase involves getting across a fairly precise and thorough account of an idea from a source in your own language. So it's sort of more zoomed in than summary. And let me say that in practice, there's no hard distinction between summary and paraphrase, right? In practice, you kind of go back and forth between them as you need. And let me mention that even if you cite your source, it still counts as plagiarism if you use the source's exact language without using quotation marks. Okay, just something good to know. It's really important to distinguish between when you're using a source's exact words and when you're using your own words to describe what a source says. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about in-text citations and signal phrases. This is stuff we're going to be talking about for the whole rest of our short little semester here. So when you're quoting or when you're using your own language to paraphrase or summarize, you're using material from a source. And either way, one of the things that you have to do is to make it clear that this material comes from your source. And you have to do that with an in-text citation, which looks like this: author, and then the page number. That's what it looks like in MLA style, which is what we're using for this paper. We'll switch to APA for the next paper. So here's an example, what I've got right below there, right? In parentheses, schools. And then schools is because I've given you a non-paginated web source for this, I'd suggest putting in N period P period, which means no pagination, which we often have to do with sources that just simply don't appear paginated. So you always need that in-text citation, and it's really good to also have a signal phrase whenever possible. So a signal phrase is something like, schools argues that, right? It signals, it's like a sort of a flag waving at your reader to say, hey, this comes from my source, right? So here's an example. So here, what you see here are two versions of the same sentence. One without a signal phrase and one with a signal phrase. So cultural reinforcement happens when commercials make us feel good about our values and beliefs, or schools argues that cultural reinforcement happens, etc. So I've got to tell you that both of these options are technically correct, right? Both of them make it clear to your reader that this material comes from a source and that, that there's a direct quotation here. But stylistically, I think that the version with the signal phrase is a whole lot better. I think it's cleaner and it's more upfront. You're really claiming your source there. Schools argues that. So I'm going to really push signal phrases. I often find that students haven't used them self-consciously before this class, so I really want you guys to use signal phrases as a way to introduce quotations. It really helps to introduce that quote rather than just like jumping in there. And note what happens to your in-text citation if you have a signal phrase. In that second version, it's obvious already that the quotation comes from schools, so then I don't have to have schools' name in parentheses there because it's clear from context already. So let's think a little bit about what circumstance we want to quote, summarize, or paraphrase. So it's really easy to overquote. And quoting and analytical writing is a very discipline-dependent thing. In the humanities, like in English courses or philosophy courses or history courses, quoting is, we do quote. In social sciences like psychology, sociology, they tend not to quote very much at all. So that's something to be sensitive of in the future. But really, you want to be careful about when you quote. You only want to quote when you have something that's really quotable. I know that sounds syllogistic, but what I mean by that is that you want to quote when you care about the language of a source, right? When there's a really great phrase that you just feel like you can't do justice to if you were to paraphrase it. And thinking in those terms is going to force you to kind of minimize your quoting, and that's always a good practice. So like in this example, cultural reinforcement is a key term, right? It's a really good phrase. So I would recommend quoting that. But as for the rest of that, paraphrase. When we get to our next essay, we'll talk about dealing with statistics. It's not going to be concerned in this particular essay, but you never want to quote statistics. They can be easily paraphrased, and they're a prime example of stuff that's just like not super quotable. So you want to summarize when you just want to capture the gist of what a source argued, and you want to paraphrase when you care about the specifics of a source. And like I mentioned, there's no hard distinction between summary and paraphrase, but we got to remember that there is a hard distinction between quoting and paraphrasing or summarizing, right? In that quoting uses the exact language of the source, and paraphrasing and summarizing do not. Paraphrasing is the hardest. Because you're trying to, you have to change both the wording and the structure of the original without changing the content. And it's always tempting to paraphrase just by going through an original paragraph and subbing in synonyms, like having your thesaurus open and subbing in synonyms. But that is actually that's a really bad practice, because it leaves the original structure intact, and that really can count as plagiarism. So that's something we want to stay away from. So here's my best advice about paraphrasing. Do not, under any circumstance, use a thesaurus to look up synonyms. That's just not going to help you. What you want to do instead is to read the original, understand it, and then put it away. Don't look at the original while you're paraphrasing. That is seriously the secret to doing it well, to not look at the original. That's going to force you to use your own language and structure. You want to think about you would rather err on the side of inaccuracy than that of plagiarism, right? You're not going to say it as well as the original author did, and that's fine. You got to accept that, and say it as best you can. And you also have to be pretty confident in your understanding of the text. You have to have a little swagger in your step to be able to paraphrase well. So you've just kind of got to go for it. It's a little bit scary, but so long as you're not plagiarizing, you'll be okay. So here's an example. You'll see an original passage on the left, and then a pretty terrible plagiarizing paraphrase on the right. Notice what they've done. I've color coded this so that you can see that what this writer did was just to go through the original and use synonyms. Students frequently overuse direct quotation in taking notes, versus students often use too many direct quotations when they take notes, resulting in, and as a result. That is too close to the original. This person was, there's no way you would reproduce it this exactly if you were not looking at the original when you did your paraphrase, right? That's why I think that's a good strategy. So here's an example. Here's another example. On the left is those last couple of sentences of paragraph 6 of the Scholes essay. Does the text also sell Budweiser? And so on. Here's the paraphrase. Scholes argues that the main job of the commercial is not to sell Budweiser. Only market research can tell that. Its primary job is to sell the American way, to make its beer a national beer. So, in some ways, this is a good paraphrase. I think that first sentence is a pretty good paraphrase. But look at what happens in the second sentence. Only market research can tell that. Look at how that's almost word for word the Scholes essay, right? Just takes out the parentheses there. So that at that point we're getting a little bit too close to the original, and I think you can fix that pretty easily. By moving things around, right? Scholes argues that the main job of the commercial is not to sell Budweiser, something that business executives might want to, something that business executives certainly might want to do, but that we would need extra research to test. Right? There we go. That's not the world's greatest paraphrase, but it works, and it's different than the original, right? Don't look at the original. That's the key thing. Okay, I'm out, and we'll have one more installment here.